The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. Good morning and welcome to the Old School Podcast, the podcast about the American education system, its quirks, its qualities, its traits, its foibles, its problems and solutions, and so far as we know, the solutions. And with me in this endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good morning,
Ferrell,
sir.
good morning, sir. It's good to see you. You're looking rather chipper.
I'm
For
annoyed.
Yeah, are you annoyed?
I'm annoyed.
Okay, what's on your mind? Go ahead and get it over with, so we can move on with our topic.
It's
What's up?
TV. Well, I mean, I weep for our country when I watch commercials of TV shows that are coming up. Not only that, but I saw a Glenn Levitt commercial,
What is it?
a
Oh,
very
the
fine,
the the Scotch. That's a really great Scotch.
a very fine scotch, and it was being advertised by moody, serious-looking 20-year-olds
Oh,
in conjunction with overly jovial 20-year-olds who just seems to have the world by the cojones. And I just, I'm sitting there looking at it going, geez almighty, what are we doing? And so I get annoyed by stuff like that.
well, I don't want to
I
say
mean,
too much.
Glenn Levitt, that's a scotch for adults.
Well,
And
that's
you
and
got
it,
these young yahoos on these commercials. Who are they trying? Are they trying to get 20-something-year-olds into Glenn Levitt? They can't afford it.
well, it's sometimes behind the glass. I mean, it's an expensive. They did the same thing to Jameson. Actually, it became a kind of a party drink. It's a really good whiskey, but suddenly Glenlivet now too. Thank you, Herr Miller. So let's introduce our guest, our esteemed guest, a good friend that
Quick pivot.
technically we both worked with, but I worked with this gentleman for quite a few years, and I'm still working with him indirectly. This is Ferrell Yeokum, and he's an executive director at Responsive Ed, and a wonderful friend and a great educator, and also an author in education. Ferrell, welcome.
Well, thank you, Dr. Burns. Appreciate your having me on your podcast today, and Ross, thank you so much for having me.
Thank
And
you.
I look forward to adding any content that I can.
Well,
We take all content we can get.
we need it. We need it. You see, we start talking about whiskey and scotch, and we need a
Yeah,
transition. So
yeah,
essentially, you've already saved us from ourselves and showing our
Yeah.
levels.
Left to our own devices, this
Oh,
thing could go off the rails very quick.
it's depravity, and I think we're about to show our vices, which is not seemly. I don't think. Well, we're going to talk about a topic that I don't know that we've addressed this directly, and I've been thinking about this all morning, thinking, have we? I mean, we've talked about kids today and how they behave, but we really haven't addressed how teachers work with students and maybe the new student after COVID. I've been pondering that teachers with one voice will say, "Oh, it was better before COVID. Something happened to our students; they lost their minds." And some of us think, "Well, if you've been in a middle school, it hasn't changed that much over the years." But what do you think about that? Maybe starting right with the recent Farrell, has there been a change based upon? I know you're working with schools. You're kind of the boss of the boss of the boss of the teachers, but you're working with indirectly with a lot of teachers. What's the word on the street as far as the climate right now?
Well, there's what's happening that I see anyway is that it's becoming more difficult to maintain a peaceful and joyful classroom, which is what a teacher should be able to do. And instead, they're often filled with chaos and with disruptions and children who won't behave the way they should. And teachers come into the profession, in my opinion, passionate about wanting to be a good teacher. And then at the same time, they're often a little bit fearful of how to interact with these scholars that they see in front of them and what to do when one of them maybe doesn't obey the teacher the way they should. And so that's what I see. And so I do see a lot of teachers that get out because the way the kids misbehave, And then furthermore, a lot of them get out because the administration that they work for doesn't really support them very well. They haven't had the training, don't support them very well. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay. Well, I guess come to think of it, we've talked about, Mr. Miller's classroom and my classroom, and they were quite different, different relationship with the students. But we were, for most of our career, older seasoned teachers who had gone through the process to learn. And a lot of teachers don't make it through that early stage where they maybe figure it out. Um, but it's also possible that there are a lot of older teachers who have been around who are still struggling and haven't figured out the term classroom management discipline, whatever you want to call it. But they're I don't think it matters maybe if you're new or not. The trouble is still there.
That's correct. Obviously, if you're brand spanking new, what I call a rookie teacher, I refer to
Mhm.
them as a rookie teacher,
Yeah.
their first year, uh, they don't know what they don't know, and often they haven't had very much training, and so they enter in kind of naive. I did when I was a teacher. I struggled horribly my first year. I was one of those who tried to quit even before my first year was up, and thank the Lord, He helped me to understand that there were things I could learn and do and overcome that. But the point is this: is that there's a lot of teachers who are seasoned teachers that have kind of hung in there for whatever reason, but they still struggle. There are classrooms with teachers who have been teaching for 10 or more years that are chaotic, and part of that, Steve, is because um, the way that the homes are these days, um, there's there are what I call it coddling. There are a lot of children who are the whole idea is that they want to make their children happy. They want them to be bored. They don't want them to have to struggle with what to do next. They have a screen in front of them, or if they don't, they'll get one. There's just a lot of it's so different these days from the way we were raised, and so when they come to school that way, then they don't really know how to they don't know how to behave. And so as I mentioned one other time that we in teaching we're not supposed to take children on to raise them. That's supposed to be done at home. We take them to teach them. They're there to learn. It's kind of a business atmosphere. It should be a business like atmosphere. But because of the way that they are not made to obey their parents at home, and often they become kind of over familiar, I suppose, with adults. They feel like often they come to school kind of with it feeling like they can just address adults like they do their parents, which is inappropriate. And so now you've got a classroom full of 20 of students. Most of them are going to be behaving, but it just takes a few to end up um, disrupting your classroom, keeping you from teaching and other students from learning.
Mhm.
They often and sociologists talk about school as kind of like a socialization engine, a way by which kids, figure out what to do, what not to do, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate given a particular situation.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, what is that, for lack of a better word, what does that bell curve look like as far as like if you're talking about like kindergartners, I mean, that's like Lord of the Flies down there. I mean, and at some point over the next couple of years, the idea is that they start learning what's appropriate behavior, what are the norms in particular environments.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, what at what point does I don't know quite how to put this, but at what point does classroom management go from controlling to maybe managing and working with the students?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question because the kindergarten is usually the first year that we see them in public education or formal education, and so it's the base. And if we don't help them in that year, then they're going to go into first grade in kind of inappropriate. They're not going to have learned what I call self control. Because here's the thing that I think is true, Ross, is that we self control is either learned and or taught. Sometimes it's easily learned just by watching and being around, but self-control is not natural, and it's a learned or taught. It can be learned. It can be taught, and
Mm.
yet often we don't think of it that way. we kind of assume that when they get to like third or fourth grade, they probably have a decent amount of self-control. But if they haven't learned it or been taught it when they were 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, they won't have self-control because it is a learned. Have you ever thought about it that way? That is actually a learned behavior. A lot of people have never thought about it that way. And as leaders in the classroom, the teacher needs to understand that and to know that it 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 can be caught. Self-control can be caught, so to speak, but it also needs to be taught.
So you talk about leaders as teachers, and a lot of teachers don't think of themselves that way to begin with, and they'll think, "What does he mean by that?" Um, but I know you're right about that. And what would be your vision of that transition from teaching to being a leader of a group of kids?
Well, I think it's a part of learning to become a teacher that's left out of any of the institutions that work with teachers and or alternative certification. They don't talk about leadership, and so most teachers, as I did, I felt like the leader was the principal, superintendent. Other people were the leaders, but the teacher is a leader. They're there alone with these children every day. They're the only adult in the room, and so if they aren't learning some of the leadership skills, I call the 5 Cs, then they're not going to be as successful as they would be otherwise. And so what we see happening is students are just kind of moved along. They just kind of move along, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. But if teachers would understand their need to have a good control order, I like to call it classroom order in their classroom, then their children are not going to be able to take on the learning that they should. And I think we all realize these days that what happens is with all the you probably talked about several podcasts before, but with all of the social media that goes on with kids seeing short reels and short videos and stuff, there's so much of this that children have a hard time really concentrating on anything for very long. And so what's happened is that in education we've tried to go along with that, and we do 5 minutes of this and then have a break, and then do 5 minutes of that and then have a break. And we need to help our children to learn that they need to be able to concentrate and spend more time on a subject than a short reel video that happens. So another aspect to it, if I may, is that
Yeah.
um, the t- there's a lack of consistency in homes and then also in schools. And so it's too often that a parent and or even a teacher will handle an event in one way this time and then differently another time. And so with the lack of consistency in the way things are handled, children don't learn that self-control because it varies. In other words, a student, we've seen it in grocery stores where we've all seen this, where a scene with a mother and a young child, and I want this. Oh, no, you can't have that. Well, I want this one. No, you can't have that. Well, I want this. And after a while of I want this and saying no, then you say, okay, all right, I'll let you have it. So what did the child learn? I get 4 no's before I get to a yes. And maybe it's 6 no's, maybe it's 15 no's. But they'll take the chance that they're at that point that even though they're misbehaving, that this may be the time I get my way. And teachers have got to learn to be consistent in their classroom along with clarity, being very clear as to what the expectations are in the room and holding their children accountable for that. Parents are not holding their children accountable for their actions as they should. And so they come to us in school with that deficit of not being held accountable. And so we need to teach our children that there are logical consequences to everything that we do. And they can be good consequences or they can be not such good consequences. And that's training for life. That's why we have childhood, is so that parents can help them to learn to control themselves. And that is missing in so many homes. There's a lot of homes that do great work. We still have a lot of wonderful parents that bring their kids to school, but we have an increasing number of them who do not. And that causes, when we have one student that disrupts the class, they stop the teacher from teaching and they stop the other students from learning. It just takes one. And these days, most classrooms have 4 or 5 or 6 students like that in the room. Not all of them, but it just takes one.
I was thinking about the idea that, as a profession, teachers have always had to deal with the uncontrollable, the outliers that exist outside the boundaries of the school walls and property. That was always going to be something that teachers had to navigate when dealing with kids, because not all kids come to us on the same level on many different categories, classroom management or just behavior being one of them.
Right.
And so I remember towards the end of my career, I don't remember classroom management or um, classroom management being taught or being trained. There was about 15, 20 years ago, there was Love and Logic, and that was like a big thing that people did for a while. And that's not to put it down, because it was really, to my recollection, it was the last major initiative and push to try to teach teachers how to manage a classroom. There's also the idea that classroom management to a degree can't be taught. It has to do with the teacher themselves, how they comport themselves, how they conduct their business in the classroom.
Mhm.
Is where maybe the answer lies somewhere in between. Is there a deficit in classroom management training instruction, either in college or in the workforce? How much of it can be taught? How much of it cannot be taught?
Mhm. Well, of course, there are some natural inclinations that we all have as human beings, and children in particular. And they do need to we need to remember that um, discipline is something that is good. We all need more discipline in our lives. I'm going on 80 years old. I still need discipline. I need to be have discipline in my life. And so as children, when they're being formed, they need that. So I think it can be taught, and it is not as easy to wrap your arms around as you might think, or your mind around it. But just a simple thing such as having a list of your expectations or rules. People, I like the term expectations, either one, and reviewing them with your students. But I see teachers that especially get to 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th grade. The kids should just know that. They know what it is. You don't talk unless you raise your hand. You're making an assumption that is not true. A lot of these children don't know what to do. And so we need to teach them at the beginning of the year, these are my expectations in this classroom about how you get my attention, about how you ask to uh, go to the bathroom or to get a book or whatever. And that is helping them to learn that in an environment such as a classroom, there's management that must go on. And part of that is you have to control yourself. You might feel like that you want to just get up and go sharpen your pencil. But in my room, if you do that, there's a consequence, because one of the expectations in my room is that you raise your hand and ask for permission before you do anything. And if you don't do that, then there should be a consequence, because we're a team and we rise and we fall together. And you are one member of that team, just like a football team, a basketball team, and the other team. You can't have one member of that team deciding that they're not going to participate or participate inappropriately. So some of the analogies work really well and some of them don't work really well. But I do find that often we assume, I call it a suicide. Don't commit a suicide by assuming that your children should just be able to know this or that. They need to be taught how to sit in their seat. They need to be taught how to line up. They need to be taught how to remain quiet when they're supposed to. They need to be taught not to look out the window. There are aspects of carrying on the business of learning in the classroom. It can still be fun. We need to have fun in there too. That's why I say we need classrooms that are peaceful and joyful. You deserve as a teacher to have a classroom that is peaceful and joyful. How do we get there? You have to resolve that you're the only adult in the classroom. You are the leader in your classroom, and your children are looking to you to set the tone and to make sure, because there are so many children who come in to the classroom who are yearning to be able to learn, and we talk about those children who don't, but we need to protect the rights of those children who aren't the ones who are disruptive. And so we can't just ignore or gloss over, because there's too much that happens these days, Ross. It's too much of this aspect of I'm kind of afraid, and teachers actually are fearful of imposing discipline. I'm not talking about punishment, because that's different. This discipline is not punishment. There may be an aspect to it that's uncomfortable, and they may, but it's not. We're not trying to punish children. We're trying to help them to learn self-control.
So a lot
But
of
if you're dealing with a
parents,
teacher, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
well, parents could be listening to Ferrell right now and say, "Well, I want him in in the room with my students," based on what you just said. Um, but I also think that in every classroom, there's a different leader, if we want to call them that, with their own discipline expectations, and so you're kind of as good as your weakest link. But teachers probably would like support from the administration and even clarity of what is the plan? How do we as a school do this? Because it seems like if you have consistency across classrooms, you're going to get more buy-in. Otherwise, you're teaching a whole different set of rules in each grade level, in each class, and in high school. Can you comment on the school-wide? What can the school do to support the teacher?
Excuse me. Yes, absolutely. It is important. If you have a school that's in chaos and out of control,
Hmm.
the the best thing is to get that under control. The reason why I start with teachers is because honestly, many of them are in schools that aren't interested in doing something campus wide. But the best plan is to make sure there's consistency, so that when a student moves from second grade to third grade, it's not a huge change, expectation wise, rules wise. Um, each teacher might have a little different level of comfort with certain things, such as one teacher may feel like, to not be tardy, you need to be sitting in your desk with your journal open and writing down the work that I have on the board. Other teachers might feel like, I want you to maybe have your big toe almost in the room when the bell rings. And it's okay to have some differentiation there. But ultimately, there needs to be the idea of, we're not going to be tardy for school. Some teachers may have a different way that they handle homework. But if you move from third to fourth grade and the teacher's dramatically different, then it looks like that we're not really together on how education is supposed to work. So we all know they need to do homework. It's just different how much and when, and different things like that that happen. So the school needs to work out some sort of consistency. In one of the way that we do it is it's a it's affectionately known as the book. It's called Teachers Involved in Educational Responsibility, but they always refer to it as signing the book. And that's one of the things I help schools to do if they're interested in that, is setting up a campus-wide plan. Because otherwise, then the teacher is like, every teacher may be a little different. And so how does administration support them when this teacher has this rules and these other teachers have this rule and they're different rules? So what happens then is, often that's what's missing, is that the teacher isn't sure what will be supported once they feel like that they need help from the office for a student that is either disobeyed too frequently, or is some sort of a major situation is going on. There's a lack of, what happens is, there's a lack of consistency then at the administrative level, which causes teachers to be unsure and even fearful as to whether or not they should consequent a student, and how they should consequent a student. Does that make sense?
It does. And in fact, Ross, you and I taught together. And if you picture walking into every one of those classrooms, say there were 20, just how different the expectations were room to room.
And the thing is that, you know, whatever classroom management is in a particular room has got to fit the personality of the teacher
Hmm.
that's in front. And the teacher cannot be what they're not.
Right.
And so, and because generally students can sniff that one out pretty quickly, but it does create a pretty wide dispersion of methodology or lack thereof as you go into one classroom or another. I have good friends of mine that have great classroom management, and yet they're the kind of like the den mom kind of personality. And I've got, and I was hell and gone from that approach because I didn't have I didn't have any of that in me, and I couldn't do that. But in to your point, Farrell, I think it's that's the first thing that jumped in my mind when you talked about the fact that as an administration, how do you train, how do you support something that naturally is going to be so varied from classroom to classroom? It seems like an impossible task from an administrative point of view. I mean, are we talking about maybe something like teachers helping teachers kind of a thing? Or I even can't imagine like a set manual being the guideline for every single teacher because, as I said,
Yeah.
teachers are so different.
Yeah, there is no recipe. There's no magic solution that we can have. There's not a magic wand to wave over a teacher to know how to do this or a student to know how to do this. So um, there's always going to be we can train teachers. Frankly, we can train teachers on how to prevent disruptions,
Mm,
but not all of them.
mm,
There's always going to be some outliers, always going to be some students who, but it's so important to be, we talk about being proactive, and yet so many teachers are not proactive when it comes to discipline. When they see it, then they take care of it. Well, let's prevent it. There are ways to prevent those things. There are common things in a classroom. An administrator knows that the big issues don't usually happen in the classroom.
Right.
But if you don't take care of the little things, then you start having big things. You see schools where there are fights between every class. There's some racial disparities that happen where people are saying things they shouldn't to one another, mistreating one another, being unkind to one another. Why not say this is a golden rule school? We are going to treat one another as you want to be treated. And we're going to do these things because that's the right thing to do. And to try to have some sort of an overall that's why a principal is it's very important that they are often meeting and in front of their students so they can show that we rise and we fall together at this school. And so I am expecting that we're going to be kind. There's virtues that need to be taught, how to be kind to one another, how to be responsible with my tone of voice and the way that I say things. These are things that children need to begin to learn. And once that they learn that as a part of a team, the way that I interact with other students and with the teacher and with others uh, has an impact even upon myself. And they begin to, if we do it properly, they begin to have that self-control, and and when we have discipline in our lives, we're happier. If you have an undisciplined person, an adult, there's a lot of them around. They're undisciplined, taking meth and doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing because they weren't taught self-control. We have 40 and 50 and 60-year-old people that are out of control. There's a place to learn. A home is the best place to learn that, of course.
That
But
it
if
was
they
said
don't
that the
have it
cruelest
there, we can do some of it at school.
it was said that the cruelest thing you can do is to leave a child to its whims. And, because that discipline allows them to control that, but then also for them to be able to achieve what they want to achieve, that can only be done through the learning of discipline.
Yep. Yes, the natural bent of a person is towards decadence. People are not naturally inclined towards doing good and kind things. And goodness is a term that's way overused. We had one of the mantras at the last school that I ran was just a few years ago is that the students would in morning assembly, we had the pledge, we required a course, and it's fine. We want to do that. Pledge allegiance to the U.S. flag, Texas flag, and then we had a pledge to our school. And the pledge was, I will learn what is true. I will do what is good, and I will love what is beautiful. And we have too much today we see it all around us where it's hard to discover truth even. We're lied to all the time by people in high places. We're not going to do that at this school. This school is one we're going to learn what is true. And to love what is good, we use things like awesome and all that, which is okay. But just basic goodness is something that we need to learn to do good. And to love what is beautiful, think of all the perversion in the world these days. It's been said that 80% of the men in America are on pornography at least once a week. We're filled with things that are not beautiful. And we need to help our children to learn the difference between what is true, good, and beautiful and what is not. And we can do that. I've seen it happen I've seen children transformed into being kind people rather than bullies.
So, Farrell, your intervention point is right now at the individual teacher level. And if somebody purchases your book, and we're going to put that in the link, a teacher could pick that up and get some strategies that'll help them. And I've developed a habit, and I shouldn't be doing this because it's sort of depressing, but there are videos of teachers who just quit. I may have mentioned this in another podcast, and they just stare at their phone and talk, and they're helpless, and it's a real sad thing. But I'm a researcher, and I want to know, what is it? And suddenly you have some really solid suggestions that could get them out of that state. And maybe if you could give our listeners, and we do have teachers out there, just a few things that they can do on Monday. And this is a tough week because this is right before Christmas break. Uh,
Yeah.
what would be a few things that you would tell them that might give them a little bit of happiness, and stop them from that moment where they're given that testimonial before they leave?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. I can actually share some things with you that are simple,
Hmm.
but they're just not easy.
Yeah.
They're not easy, and there's a difference. But I do recommend that anytime you have more than 3 days away from your children, when you get back with them again, you go over your expectations with them again. So, maybe not over Labor Day, but over Thanksgiving when you come back, go over it again. Your children need to hear it again because you are needing to reinforce upon them the idea of self-control and not disrupting your class. So, to get to your point, they could do it Monday when they show up. I would certainly recommend doing it if they do it then, to do it again when they come back from winter break. And that is to go over your rules. They should be posted, and a thing that really worked with children is no secrets, no surprises. We don't we don't keep anything from them about what our expectations are. You can call them rules if you want. They need to know what our expectations are, and therefore they should be written. They should be posted. And I recommend that children should write it in a book, in their journal, and whatever they keep. I suggest they should be sent home to parents. These are the expectations in my classroom. And if your student does not follow them, I don't mind using the word obey. If they won't follow my rules and expectations, if they disobey my rules and expectations, there will be a consequence. And some of the consequences can be they're the last one to leave the room. They might have to spend 15 minutes after school with me in a detention. There's to really be honest with the students and with yourself. And I think it's also a great idea to even say, I have to apologize to you as a class, is that I have not been as faithful as I should be to help you to become a good person. And I think that I really want to do better at that. And so therefore, I want you to know how much I care about you. I want you to know how much I feel like that it's my responsibility as the leader in this class to do a better job of making sure that we have order in this classroom and that we're learning. We can have fun and enjoy it, but we're here to learn certain things. And I cannot allow one of you to keep me from teaching or those students from learning. And so you need to realize that it's a new leaf, and I'm going to take it seriously. And so don't be surprised if you violate one of these principles that we're talking about. There will be a consequence. You can't put a rule for everything. Some things just need to be a procedure.
Mhm.
You can have a lot of procedures, but you should only have 5 or 6 definite rules that cannot be disobeyed without there being a consequence. It's not a punishment, it's a
Right.
consequence.
Mhm.
And they need to realize that when you do good things, you get a good consequence. When you do bad things, you get a bad consequence. There are consequences in life for all of us, and they can't wait until they're 18 for them to understand that.
It is interesting to talking about the idea of the teacher kind of resetting, as it were, and preceding that by a recognition that things have not gone the way they're supposed to go. I think sometimes teachers are worried about admitting mistakes or admitting failure, on their part because they think somehow that makes them look weaker. I guess what that looks like and how that sounds like, I guess, is different depending on the age group of the kiddos that you're dealing with. But I mean, it can go across the board. I can't tell you how many times a kid asked me a question about history, and I say, I don't know. I don't know. And so the idea that I'm supposed to know everything or I'm supposed to have my thumb on the pulse of everything is unrealistic without some trial and error, without mistakes being made. And if you're not willing to fess up either to yourself or to the people in front of you that mistakes have been made, I don't know how you progress from there.
Yes, sir, Ross, I can tell you that, it I have seen it. I've done it myself, and I've seen the effect on a student when you say, "Listen, I haven't done the job as well as I should have. I'm human, I am your teacher, and I wanna do better. Would you forgive me for not having been the teacher that you deserve to have? I wanna tell you some things I wanna do starting right now. I love every one of you. You can't really be a good teacher if you don't have good affinity for your children." And by admitting those kinds of things to them, Ross, it builds that bridge of affinity. My
Mhm.
teacher really does care about me, and they realize that maybe they haven't done as well as they should. Who has done as well as they should? Even in one day,
Mhm.
we make mistakes. And I haven't had a perfect 24/7 yet, a perfect 24 rather, yet. And so it's a humanity kind of things. We're forming human beings. These are children who are learning to become what they should become. One of my sayings I use is always be willing to give up who you are for who you might become. They're becoming, and we need to help them to become what they should be becoming.
And part of that lesson is knowing that no matter how far along the road you are, you're still going to make mistakes. And you need to be able to look at them honestly and then move forward and do better.
Absolutely.
So Farrell, I like your approach to being very respectful to the young person, whatever age they are, and you're not advocating this gamification. And I know I really give elementary teachers a bad time sometimes for turning things into games and having color codes for discipline and maybe writing the word recess on the board and then taking off letters when the class is bad. And so you're doing a group punishment. What you talked about is really humane. The student is going to be the last to leave.
Yep.
That makes sense, and that's something that is easy to implement, and you're not ruining your climate and turning it into a game show. But this is behavior. It's serious, but it's also incredibly respectful. And I think that a lot of teachers will appeal to them because they don't have to. Um, Restructure everything and give little rewards and punishments, but it's I mean, this is it's akin to good parenting, but you're doing it with 30 young people in front of you instead of a small family.
Yeah, it does work because we've got, I don't know, at least 45 school districts in around that use it, and, lots of schools that use it, and they keep using it. It
Mhm.
it takes a year or 2 to really get it go but one of the points that you made is on the recess on the board and wiping it off. You should never consequent a whole class. They're not all guilty,
Right.
and you will lose respect. You can't afford to lose the respect of your children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I like it when people agree with me on that. Because some teachers will say, "Well, but that really works, and I'm fighting for my life here, Steve." And and we've all been there, but I guess it's just like Ross and I talk about testing. We say the best testing is the messiest. It's a little bit difficult to grade and administer, and the type of
Mhm.
discipline you're talking takes a little bit longer.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
but it's a long-term it's development, and it's an important moment. Um, and there are some things about Love and Logic that make sense, but I don't like kind of the gotcha, the tone of the saying, "Uh-oh, uh-oh, you did this, now this happens." That has a power relationship that's just a little bit weird. Um, and so the the idea of giving a consequence makes sense. But it's about respecting the child, but also respecting those other kids who aren't who are going about their business like they should.
Right. Yeah. A consequent-based system, a systematic approach with
Mhm.
consequent-based works.
Mhm.
Love and logic, as far as I know, isn't used in schools anymore. At parents, it's a kind of a parent program,
Right.
but we have restorative justice and we have the PBIS, and they have some good points to them.
Right.
Obviously, they're not all bad, but they what seems to happen is we give kids excuses for not behaving the way that they should, and so what they learn is that misbehave does not have the consequences that it's going to have once you get out of school. You can't tell McDonald's, "I was always allowed to be 15 minutes late." They're gonna you're not gonna keep your job. So we're not we need to teach them life skills. And SEL, the social emotional learning, it has some great aspects to it. It really does. But there are some things it's a little bit too touchy-feely, a little bit too much. You can't help it. They're there. I'm sorry, you can't help that. And there can be some that's not always all bad, but it's overused. And instead of holding our children accountable, we give them excuses for not acting the way they should.
This is very timely in the sense that, my daughter is now getting to the point where she's in the 6th grade, and she's getting to a point now where she is running into a pretty disparate group of teachers with different teacher styles, different ways of interacting, and teaching her that, listen, not everybody you run into in life are gonna act in the same way or be the same way towards you. You need to be able to figure out how to deal with that and do it in, like, a respectful way. But I do recall, just in general, the idea that respect going into how we interact with people, and, my daughter said to me the other day, she goes, "I'm tired of people treating me like I'm 11." I said, "Well, because 'cause you're 11." There's a progression that happens, and it's so,
Yeah.
and she goes, "But I'm not being treated as an equal." I said, "But you're not an equal." I said, "But you're learning how to be an equal. You're learning how to take on those responsibilities
Yeah.
and how to, pick up on the social cues and whatever the case may be."
Yeah.
But it's a process, and it starts with the idea, that every kid is desperately trying to be what they want to be or what they can be, which is an adult, and a functional adult, a respected adult. They want to be that way. And it's just a question of making sure they understand that. And, when I was in a classroom, I would greet people, it's kind of a cliche, but I mean, I would greet people at the door, I say, "Good morning," it's just, sometimes I'd
Excellent.
shake hands, what have you. I mean, there's no sense of being adversarial, especially first moment of the day. And so I think it does come with, you model what you want. And and in that sense, you
Yes.
show the kids, this is how adults work. This is how adults behave. This is how they interact with people. This is how they deal with frustration. This is how they deal with obstacles and challenges.
Yeah.
And if you can use that as your baseline, I think you have a better chance of being more successful in the realm of classroom management.
Yeah. Yes, there's a lot of teachers that need to, be taught some things so that they will know how to help their children to learn. Some of the adults in the classroom are not as good at self-control as they should be, and we see that in the newspapers all the time. And it kinda gives a bad name to the rest of us. Like with you as an example, or us as a father, many of our children come to us that don't have intact families.
Mm.
And so there's so many aspects to it. It can't be a, one size fits all, but doing what you're doing with your daughter is exactly what is needed because you are raising her and you are helping her to know how to do things like and how to shake hands, how to be a good person. And many of our children don't get that. So that's the reason why the classrooms, you have many classrooms that the children are doing quite well, and then you have a few that are not. And many times, the few that are not come from very difficult situations.
Absolutely. Well, let me read the title and what happens after the colon in your title because it's a long title, but I think it's a good one. This is available on Amazon.com. Ferrell Yeokum, Mastering Classroom Discipline for New Teachers, a practical guide to create an orderly classroom, prevent disruptions, and improve student performance. And that about covers it. We're going to include the link, and as we often say with people who join us, we'd I think we're scratching the surface in this, and each one of your recommendations or chapters or pillars or 5 C's could be a podcast, and I'd love to dig in a little bit to some of these strategies, maybe at another time at your convenience. But thanks for taking some time on a Saturday. I knew it would be very easy to talk to you, and you and Ross are kind um, of the same mind, and so I saw a lot of nodding and not a lot of discord. So thank you, Ferrell, for jumping on with us today.
Absolutely. Be happy to do it again. I love the subject.
All right. Well, with that,
Mr. Miller has paused with his outro as his video has paused. And now I'm going to introduce Herr Miller to do the outro again, please.
this is the damn, this thing, internet. Anyway, so thank you so much for everyone for listening, and we hope that you got a great deal out of it. The as Dr. Bourgeois said, the information on the book is in the description, so please check that out at your earliest convenience. With that, I shall say adieu, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Miller. Thank you, Ferrell.
You're welcome. Thank you guys very much. Have a great day.